disaster in the studio.
It really is.
It's a shed room. And I blame it on, at the grand old time of 8:37, pregnancy hormone. Call me a misogynist if you like, but I've never known Nick Hodgson, so absolutely.
I'm giddy this morning.
Well, giddy.
I think we all are a bit slouched.
Yeah. Blame the little one. Love it. We're going through the papers. As you can see, with the author of broadcasting, Nicky Hodgson, and the deputy editor of Conservative Hope, Henry Hill. Morning to you both. We'll start with you, Henry, should we? The Times saying if Boris Johnson comes back as Prime Minister, it would be fatal.
Yeah, this is an intervention by William Hague and some other very senior Conservatives who are basically desperately making the case to Tory MPs as we come to the crucial question of whether Boris Johnson can get the support of 100 of them to get into the leadership contest, and saying, this is a ridiculous thing to do. Why are you doing it? You know, there are so many things that we've discussed them in previous hits, but there are so many things that could potentially go wrong. He's under investigation by the House of Commons. He'd be immediately at loggerheads with his Chancellor. You know, there are several other sort of scandals ticking away. Partygate would come back, and they're just saying, look, we're 35 points behind in the polls, which is, I think, utterly unprecedented. You know, we're looking, potentially, if there were a general election held in these conditions, it would be an absolute wipeout. You can't gamble on Boris Johnson in these circumstances. And so, you know, we've only got, I think, today and tomorrow for MPs to make up their minds. And so all of these sort of senior Tory figures from the past are just desperately trying to convince them not to roll the dice.
It's interesting then, isn't it? I was talking to Neil Wallace earlier on. If Boris Johnson gets 100 and can stand, he is Prime Minister, isn't he? By default, because unless he concedes to Rishi Sunak, which I doubt he would do, it's going to go to the members.
I think that I think he's probably the favourite to win the members' vote. I don't think he's certain to win the members' vote. I think Rishi Sunak is helped by what's happened with Liz Truss. Because Rishi Sunak ran against Liz Truss basically on the basis that everything was going to go horribly wrong, and was vindicated. And it's not just the polling numbers. The economic chaos is impacting Tory members, right? Tory members have mortgages, they have pensions, they have a cost of living like everyone else. And so I think Rishi's pitch, if it goes to the members, is, you saw what happened with Liz Truss. Do you want the same thing to happen again with Boris Johnson? If you don't, whether or not you like, whether you like the man or not, you need to vote for me to keep the market stable.
You see, interesting, just looking at this on the latest list of your thoughts this morning, abbreviating these, Kenneth says, I really hope Boris Johnson returns as PM. Peter says, if Sunak becomes PM, I'm off to the Reform Party. Jane says, Boris for PM, no other capable of winning the next election. Karen says, I think our only shred of hope will be Boris. Phil says there's one very good reason why the PM must be Boris.
Jane, they voted for Boris. Don't ignore the people's vote. Michaela, I believe Boris will come back and finish what he started. Jason, we voted Boris. We want him back.
Well, what he started was a collapse in the Conservative Party's poll rating. He probably will.
But it's like it doesn't. But if you know, that's the sense. I mean, I know, you know, we do get plenty of anti-Boris messages. But I mean, just on that one sheet, and we don't pick these. It's just how they come through. That's everyone.
Yeah.
Boris Johnson has committed supporters amongst the Parliamentary Party and amongst the electorate and amongst the Conservative Party membership, and no one's taking that away from him. But I think that what Tory MPs need to remember is that Boris Johnson can maybe get back to 30% of the vote. But that's no good in the perspective of forming a government if the other 70% really don't like you. And Boris Johnson is now, his old power was he was a unifier. He was the Tory that people who don't like Tories could like. That's not the case anymore. He's very divisive. And for everyone who feels very strongly about him in favour, there are at least as many people who feel very strongly about him against.
Well, he came in with that huge majority, didn't he? And he squandered it. By the time he left, he was only marginally more popular than Liz Truss was. So I completely agree with Henry. I just think he isn't as popular as we think.
Oh, well, interesting. Interesting. Let us know. GBViews, GBNews.uk.
But who is the unifying figure? I mean, is it then Rishi Sunak? Is it Penny Mordaunt? The Conservative Party has so many factions. I mean, look, front page of The Guardian, Tory tribes go to war. I mean, the massive challenge is going to be unifying a party that is essentially imploding.
I mean, I think that the problem is that actually what really unifies the Conservative Party is strength. Right. I mean, the Conservative Party can row in behind almost anyone. You know, there was all that talk about people leaving the party when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister. Then he won an overall majority and not half those people joined his government. The problem for the Tories and for any Prime Minister is they're coming in at a really abysmal time from a standing start with terrible economic conditions. They probably won't be able to project that strength, and when they can't, that's when Tory MPs start forming factions and making trouble.
Yeah. Meanwhile, in the real world, in the mirror, looking at the NHS, Nikki, and a tragic story, actually.
It really is tragic. So it's the very sad tale of an elderly woman who died in the back of an ambulance while waiting in a queue outside a hospital. So she was receiving treatment. Antibiotic treatment was started by hospital staff in the ambulance, and then she went into cardiac arrest in the vehicle. And they believe, the paramedics believe, that if she had got inside and there was more support, then she might have survived. So it's just this very, very terrible story now that we've got ambulances reaching the hospitals, parked outside, desperate to put the patients in, and they can't, and they're being treated as extra wards. And, you know, one of the problems we've got as well at the minute is with care homes. So part of the reason that wards are so busy is you can't discharge certain well patients to care homes because there isn't the space for them. And so you kind of got these overly busy wards with some patients.
Bed blocking in effect.
You've got bed blocking again, exactly. You don't have enough beds anyway, you don't have enough staff, and then you've got the bed blocking. So it's just a terrible story, and we really don't want to hear more stories like this over the coming winter when things are going to get worse.
The problem is people say, well, more money, more money. Well, actually, it's better logistics, isn't it? It's better organisation. It's better. More money just doesn't always help.
Well, I mean, the part of the problem is it does need more money, as well as other things. But I think ultimately the problem is that the system we have at the moment means that we have an extraordinarily high tax rate, which can't really go all that much higher, and it's still not producing enough money to fund the NHS properly. And at the same time, we're having to pour so much money into things like the NHS and pensions that things like the courts, other important bits of the state, are failing. So what we really need, I think, is we need to look at European models which maintain universal provision, but ensure that more private money is brought in alongside public money. But that's not a conversation that we're willing to have as a nation yet. But until we are, and we accept that allowing rich people to pay for more of their own care frees up more public money for people who need it, we're going to keep seeing tragedies like this.
Well, because then we get accused of having a two-tier health system.
But we already have a two-tier health system. The Financial Times the other month showed that actually British people, even though we have the NHS, British people are getting private healthcare at a very high level, and that's not just wealthy people. That's people on average incomes now. So we have a two-tier system by stealth. The difference is that currently money spent on private healthcare doesn't help anyone else because it stays in a separate private system. In a mixed system, money spent on private healthcare could subsidise public healthcare.
And there's stories like this every day. I mean, yesterday we were sat here talking about maternity failings, weren't we? The new report, I think it was half of hospitals aren't achieving adequate care for mothers, and then story today like this. I mean, it really is a desperate state of affairs. Henry, should we look at defence spending? Because Liz Truss promised, I think it was 3%, wasn't it, towards
huge.
2.5 or 3.
3%.
It was 3% by the end of 2023.
It's early in the morning to be throwing numbers at me. I'm not going to.
But now, Hunt's budget will now look to cut it back down again.
Yeah, absolutely. So these are actually two stories which I think sit very nicely alongside each other. Yeah, absolutely. Jeremy Hunt is amongst the many, many places he's going to have to find spending cuts. Defence is a really obvious one because, and this is why defence budget's in such a parlous state, voters don't feel it the way that they feel cuts to frontline services. So British governments over decades have cut defence spending time and time again. Jeremy Hunt is now looking at rolling back those commitments that we've made over the last few months in Ukraine. And I think that this is especially telling because on the very next page, the Daily Mail has a story about how China is recruiting ex-RAF and Royal Navy pilots, paying them six-figure salaries to go and train the Chinese Air Force on British equipment, and perhaps on how to shoot down British equipment. And they're using private companies based out of South Africa, historically a famous haven for mercenaries and so on, to target and headhunt ex-British Forces personnel who have worked on classified projects such as new fighters. And so I think that investment by China, contrasted with potential defence cuts in the UK, really shows that in what's looking like a much more dangerous world, we might have to put a higher priority.
You can't seriously think he can get away with this, though, surely. I mean, you've got tank regiments in the British Army that don't have any tanks at the moment. I mean, the whole thing's an absolute...
We have two divisions, Division 1 and Division 3, I think, and neither of them are deployable. But the thing is, where does he find the cuts? Because this was always the problem with Liz Truss. Do you cut schools? Probably not. Do you cut pensions? No one's going to be allowed to cut pensions. Do you cut the NHS? So you're already fighting an NHS backlog. The only way you can find cuts on the scale the government needs to find cuts is to look at the big spending departments. Those are political minefields, and so you end up cutting things like defence, which just don't have an immediate impact on people's day-to-day lives.
Let's go from that to old bangers.
Let's
Nikki,
go
could
to old
we?
bangers.
Old bangers in the Express.
Well, I know you were talking earlier about not being able to buy a new car right now and the waiting list being ridiculous, 12 to 18 months. But this is sort of moving on from that, saying that there'll be a record 15.4 million cars on Britain's roads, which will be at least 10 years old by 2027. And why is that a problem? Because there's more stuff wrong with them. You know, it's a safety risk, basically. It's difficult because you want to think from a green perspective, surely it's better to hold on to your car for longer. But apparently that's not true, especially if they're not fuel efficient. So, yeah, it's kind of just Auto Trader coming out and saying that that back in 2021 they'd already warned about this, but it's also the fact that the new car production has slowed down and there are shortages of semiconductors and other parts. That's pushed up the price on second-hand cars that are younger than 10 years. So, yeah, we've got a problem with cars in this country.
But it's interesting. I don't know what to make of this, in that even within my lifetime, when I was learning to drive and, you know, our family car and all the rest of it, if you bought a second-hand car that was less than 10 years old, you thought you were doing really well.
Yeah.
Nobody had a new car. Nobody had a new car.
No, well, we've gotten used to having new cars every couple of years, haven't we? Or people have done, and then the problems with the shortages have stopped that.
Yeah.
But I mean, I guess the main thing is the safety issue and the emissions. You know, it's not good for the environment and it's dangerous. But what are we going to do about it? There aren't the parts. So.
Service them. Get them properly serviced, and then you're all right. I mean, I don't know if you're a driver.
I gave up my insurance in 2015 when I moved to London, and I haven't driven since. I do miss it, but living here, it's completely pointless.
I mean, look, I see the appeal of a new car.
You like your cars?
I do like my cars. I do, but it's just, you know, it's a luxury, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's a luxury that people will increasingly not be able to afford because they're so expensive. I made money on my second-hand car sale. £250. I want to keep saying that because I'm very proud of myself. But now I regret selling it because I'm going to have to buy a new one and it's all very expensive, isn't it? So this is the issue.
It is.
It's the way to make money, second-hand cars at the moment.
Look, it's been very good to see you both this morning. Nice to end on something which is not political.
Yeah.
Neutral.
You know, it's sort of neutral story.
Absolutely.
Nikki, Henry, thank you both very much indeed. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thanks for your company.